Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous video I talked about returning to the old army base after 30 years for a demolition project. It brought back so many memories, the good times with my buddies, the success of starting our business, but when I was exploring an abandoned building, I stumbled upon some creepy Polaroid photos of the band Cock 5 at the base, connected to sexual encounters with women in town, including my wife and the wives of my closest friends. This revelation shook me to my core, making me question everything about my marriage and my life. I went home and confronted my wife, Chrissy, and our old group of friends, including the other wives who were involved. Through our conversation, I learned that they had all been unfaithful in the past, hiding the truth for years. Chrissy admitted that our entire marriage was built on a lie, stemming from her and her friends hooking up with soldiers at the base when they were younger. If you'd like to catch up on all the details, you can check out the first video. I've linked it in the description below. But for now, let's dive into the rest of the story. Thanks for watching. Story continuation. End. I walked into the house, and Chrissy was already home, prepping dinner. You gotta give her credit. She did everything she could to keep things normal, but her eyes betrayed her. They were filled with pain. I asked her about her mom, who had a stroke and had been seeing her doctor. I didn't have any ill will towards the woman. She had always been fair and kind to me. I studied Chrissy. There was no indication that she knew Penny had visited or what had happened. At this point, I was giving her the benefit of the doubt, but I definitely suspected her involvement in Penny's visit. I went back up to the attic. I couldn't find any more hard drives. It was starting to creep me out. Dinner was tense. Chrissy was on edge and barely ate. The conversation was silent. We talked a bit about our planned trip to visit Rachel at college in a few weeks and what that might look like. Right now, the only people I knew were in on the problem were the 5 women, but then an idea struck me, born from my conversation with Penny. I was now convinced that Paul knew about the cheating. Damn. I had to get Penny to spill. I thought about asking Chrissy, but I couldn't bring myself to put her through any more pain. We didn't need any more crying. I offered to help clean up. As usual, Chrissy declined. I settled in the living room with a cup of coffee. My mind kept going back to the hard drive. It was really bugging me. Around 10, it hit me. There was a shoebox in the garage that I found behind a shelf when I was reorganizing stuff a few months ago. It had a bunch of hard drives in it. I went and grabbed it, retreating to my office. As I was digging into the drive, Chrissy walked in. Her shoulders slumped as she could see I was still going through those damn logs. She said good night, implying I should get some sleep and not stay up so late. I just nodded, acknowledging her comment. Around midnight, I opened the back door and stumbled outside. I was starting to feel like I was going crazy. The betrayal made me feel dizzy and nauseous as I stood there in the cool night air, shivering. How could they do this? How could they keep it hidden for so long? I was always proud of my ability to hold back my worst emotions. My dad taught me to do that. If learning about the past with those photos stirred an initial rage, this was another level. I felt like a monster. I wanted to tear everything apart. I wanted to go upstairs and drag Chrissy out of bed, hold her against the wall by her throat and squeeze the life out of her. And the others, the ones who were in on it, I wanted to rip them apart. I knew I had to control myself. I couldn't let the rage take over. I would carry out what the beast inside me was screaming to do. I carefully and quietly brought the ladder from the garage into the house. I placed it carefully on the landing, leaning against the stairs. Hearing Chrissy didn't move, I went upstairs, then into her bedroom. She was sound asleep, her breathing confirming that. Her phone was charging on the bedside table. I unplugged it, dropped it onto the floor, and stomped on it, shattering the glass. It was beyond repair. Chrissy shot up, startled by the noise. In the half-light of the room, she saw me and she knew I knew. She cowered away from me. I had never seen her so scared. I had to stay calm to control my rage, at least outwardly. When I spoke, it was in a calm, soft tone. So you couldn't warn them that I was coming? The sobs came immediately. She knew that I would find it eventually, the pieces to put together the truly pathetic picture, and she knew that she was powerless once I had it. She reached out to touch me, to hold my hand. I let her. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out. Please, I beg you, I need you to forgive me. Just this once, I will never ask you again. If beating me will make you feel better, then do it. I've kept silent for so long, physical punishment would be like release after years of mental torture for betraying you. Don't do it, Keith. I understand you might want to discard me, but please don't seek revenge for this. It was so long ago. I smiled down at her. She was still afraid of me. Maybe she could see the beast inside me, the one that wanted to hurt her so badly. I walked away from her and she started to scream at me, begging me to stop. It was too late. As I quickly reached the bottom of the stairs, I flipped the ladder over, making it nearly impossible for her to get down quickly. I grabbed the backpack I had prepared, which contained my laptop and the hard drive. Then I got in my car and drove the 10 miles to a place I knew very well. Halfway there, the car's infotainment system alerted me to an incoming call. Chrissy. Damn it, her phone was destroyed, I answered. How did you call me? Through her sobs, she answered. I got down the stairs and into my car. The screen might not be working, but it connects through Bluetooth so I can call you. I told them, they know you're coming, Keith. Please stop. We can work through this, there has to be another way. I don't want you to go to prison for this. If you won't do it for me, please think of Rachel. She'll be devastated. I told her it was too late. There was nothing that could stop me from doing what needed to be done. I hung up as she continued to plead. When I arrived, I pulled into their driveway and stopped. All the lights in the house were on, illuminating the driveway. Paul and Penny had decided to leave town many years ago. They had bought a log cabin, demolished it, and then built a sprawling property on the land. It was so far out of town that they had no close neighbors. There was a wide set of stairs leading up to the front of the house, and they were standing there, together at the top, their silhouettes backlit by the light from inside the house. I was ready. I slammed on the accelerator, and my Audi Q6 e-tron's electric motor instantly propelled the car forward, the quattro all-wheel drive biting as the car quickly accelerated down the long driveway. I held on to the steering wheel as the kinetic energy stored in the Audi was transferred into Paul's BMW 5. The sound of steel, glass, and plastic exploding broke the silence. The BM quickly reversed, causing the large double garage doors to fold in. The cars stopped, with alarms blaring from the BM and Paul's love, his whale-tailed Porsche 911, being pushed back by the impact. It was partially obscured beneath the broken garage door. The airbags deployed in the Audi. As the smoke cleared, I stepped out of the car and walked around to the front of the house. As I did, Penny screamed at me, telling me that I was in big trouble. Paul calmly walked down the stairs and stood at the bottom as I menacingly moved towards him. As I got closer, he could see clearly that I was going to hit him. He could see the rage on my face. He stood with his hands on his hips and smirked as I yelled at him. My fist connected with his jaw, producing a sickening sound as he crumpled to the floor. I stood there, panting. There was a hiss nearby. It was Penny, but I blocked it out. All I cared about was the scum at my feet. After about a minute, he got up, trying to smile through his bloody mouth. So this time I punched him in the stomach, sending him crashing to the floor again, doubled over in pain. It took longer, but he got up, although this time he was swaying unsteadily. The smirk was still there. You son of a bitch, fight back. You're too chicken to fight back. He spat out a mouthful of blood, then answered. I don't know how long I've been waiting for this, Keith. Trust me, it's been a long time. I've been living with all the bad decisions I made as a 21-year-old scumbag. I've been punished brutally, and partly because of my transgressions. Now, this closes the book. My punishment will be complete. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to lift a finger to defend myself. It's not being cowardly. It's the opposite. It's being a man and accepting what's deserved. I punched him in the stomach again, this one catching him off guard as he buckled, struggling for breath. The next thing I knew, I was clutching my head, my vision blurring in excruciating pain. So as I looked at my hand, it was covered in blood, my blood. The voice that had been constantly yelling at me was becoming clearer, and so was the reason for the sudden pain. Get away from my husband, you psychotic son of a bitch. Don't you think you've done enough damage the last couple of days? I'm going to count to 3. If you don't move, I'm going to hit you again, and again until you leave, or I kill you. Then I saw Penny holding a golf club, raised and ready to strike, her expression letting me know that she was serious about every word. I raised my hands in a mock surrender and walked away from them. I went to my car, grabbed my backpack. No way my car was going anywhere anytime soon. I limped back to their driveway, onto the road, and started to walk the few miles back to the roundabout where the main roads intersected. There, I used the services restroom adjacent to the roundabout to freshen up. I washed the blood away, but couldn't hide the bump that had formed. And I also noticed a cut on my cheek, likely from the airbag when it deployed. I decided what I would do next. I started talking to truck drivers who were filling up with fuel An offer of £20 got me a ride south on a trucker's rig. 2 more truck stops and an offer to ride with a driver, and I found myself at the motorway services near Manchester. It was 8 in the morning when I reached the motorway services on the outskirts of Manchester and cleaned myself up again. I had bought some painkillers and a large bottle of water at a previous stop. It helped. The pain had lessened, but hadn't gone away entirely. I looked at the business card in my wallet, contemplating calling, but decided against it. I swiveled the phone to look at Google Maps to figure out the best way to walk to my destination. It was a 9-mile walk, and I could exit the motorway services via Service Road. Although my phone was on silent, it was still vibrating madly from missed messages and voicemails that I had ignored. At 2 in the afternoon, I reached the hospital and spent another 30 minutes circling the car park, looking for the car I was looking for. Luckily, it was parked in a secluded corner. I was able to sit on the Armco barrier next to the car without drawing any attention to myself. Around 4, a light drizzle began to fall. It quickly turned into heavy rain. I didn't have a coat, just a t-shirt and a thin sweater. I stayed put. I didn't want to miss her. Then I heard a distant voice, someone calling my name, quite anxiously. As I opened my eyes, it was Annika, looking incredibly worried. I gave her a weak smile, or at least I tried. I realized that I was shivering uncontrollably. I could barely speak. She wanted to take me to the hospital. I pleaded with her to take me back to her place. I wouldn't cause or create any trouble. I needed someone I trusted, and right now I wanted that to be her. She relented, muttering something about her better judgment before leading me to the passenger seat. After she had laid a plastic bag on the seat, telling me to take off my wet clothes, and gave me a blanket from her boot to wrap around me. On the drive back to her place, she talked to me, but it seemed so far away, distant. How things are a blur. She helped me inside. Then the next thing I realized was that I had startled myself. I had slipped into the bathtub and swallowed some water. I started to babble, and the bathroom door swung open. How did I get here? Don't worry about it. What happened? Are you okay? You were on the verge of hypothermia. Against my better judgment, I brought you home, got you out of your clothes, and helped you into the bath. I'm an idiot, but you begged. The blood and the bump on your head would have drawn attention at the hospital. You got me out of my clothes? I must have fallen asleep and slipped under there a few minutes ago. So as I spoke, she rolled her eyes. Yeah, I got you out of your clothes. Your clothes were soaked through. Hyperthermia is dangerous, and it's not like I haven't seen a naked man before. Keith, what the hell have you been up to? You are incredibly lucky I finished when I did. Sometimes it's 8 before I finish, not 5 in the afternoon like tonight. Listen, there's an Asda 5 minutes down the road. I took note of your clothes sizes before I washed them. So I'll pick up some new clothes, but don't expect any designer labels. Lastly, and don't get angry, I went through your wallet and took a picture of your driving license and sent the picture to a friend, telling her you were here with me. I didn't want to be on the front page of the papers as missing, though I'm sure you wouldn't want that. It's fine, of course it's fine. It's perfectly reasonable, and I'm incredibly grateful you did that for me. I was praying you would help me. As she walked away, she said, I think it was for my benefit, but I'm not sure. She said that it didn't matter anyway, she could be the next Joyce McKinney for all I know. I didn't understand what she meant by that. Stepping out of the bathtub, she left me with a towel and a unisex dressing gown. As I walked into the dining room, I found my backpack and started up the laptop connected to hard drive. I needed to know the rest of what happened, even though I couldn't see how it could be worse than what I had already discovered. I didn't hear the door open as Annika returned. Please tell me you're not still going through those logs. I looked at her and gave her a sad nod. She walked over to the laptop, closed the lid before telling me to join her in the living room. I have some clothes here for you. It's fine if you want to keep the dressing gown on for now, as long as you're comfortable. She poured us both a glass of wine, then looked at me sadly. I'm guessing you've continued digging into Pandora's box and confirmed your suspicions? I nodded my agreement. Talk to me if you're willing. I'm guessing the mess I found you in, plus the swelling on your head, the cut on your face, and the bruised knuckles were a direct result of what you found. Yes. I felt like I was going to cry. I took a few deep breaths, then turned to her. I kept digging. It seemed one of my partners had been trying to cover up their dirty deeds by telling the girls that this sort of thing was common while we were working. I swear on my daughter's life that it was not true. I remained a faithful partner, despite plenty of opportunities over the years. The chat logs showed that the girls were angry at the time. One of them had posted in the chat, along the lines of, if they weren't being treated fairly, then it gave them the right to do the same. So it was planted in their minds that it was acceptable. Add in some of the band members into the mix, the girls were primed for it, then it happened. It's painful reading the detail. It pretty much matched what the girls said, up to a point. Both Chrissy and Penny, one of my partner's wives, tried to convince me to stop looking. Chrissy obviously knew what I would eventually encounter and tried to use the notion that it was just history and she had proven herself to be a model wife and mother, a fact that I couldn't argue with. Penny came to our house when Chrissy wasn't there, and I'm pretty sure Chrissy had no idea she was coming. She again, like Chrissy, tried to use it was just history, albeit a wrong and painful one, but took it a step further. She made it very clear that if I continued, it would be a disaster in every aspect of my life. So that's when I knew there was something there that would bring everything crashing down. Then she did something strange. Without saying it, she offered herself to me, or at least that's how I felt. Anika looked startled at his revelation. I'm sorry, Keith. Are you saying she offered to have sex with you? How did she think that would solve anything? She didn't really say it, but she was dressed very provocatively. Then she stood next to me and moved towards me, making it very clear what she was offering. It was what she said when I admonished her. She said it was to balance the scales. It didn't make sense until later that night when I continued to read through the chat logs. About 4 months after it all started, it seemed that Paul had found a picture of Penny having sex. I guess they had a few Polaroids they had taken. Here's where things get twisted. Paul threatened to expose everything the girls had done to us. He dismissed their argument that we were doing the same thing too, because we would all deny wrongdoing because they had no proof, whereas he, of course, did. He had at least one picture of the girls in his possession. I could feel my heart pounding, even though it was shattered, reliving what I had discovered only a few hours ago. Still cut deep. Anika took one of my hands in hers, holding it tightly. She told me I didn't have to continue if I didn't want to, but I knew I needed to. Paul gave them an ultimatum. Give him what he wanted or he'd expose them all. He gave the girls a week to think about it, and the logs show a huge volume of back and forth. The girls were divided, sometimes changing their minds about going through with it overnight. Eventually, they all agreed to allow it to happen. It would remain a deep, dark secret, never to see the light of day. Paul wanted one thing. He had always been infatuated with Chrissy. She would spend a night with him and do whatever he asked. So, she did. I acted when down that legal by me. By this time, tears were flowing freely, even though it had been years and years ago. Reading it now, it felt like it had happened yesterday, last week, or last month. It wasn't history. I am really, really sorry, Keith. That's awful to discover now, just the once. Yes, but it's worse. Chrissy became pregnant. It seems all the stress had messed up her body, causing the contraceptive pills to fail. He had sex with her when she was at her most fertile. I couldn't contain it anymore. The tears, the sobs, the anguish poured out. I turned and clung to Anika as she held me, gently patting my back, saying soothing words to try to calm my pain. That was the thing. No words could soothe it. After a while, she released me, as I'd calmed a little. She said that wine wasn't the best thing to drink, so she made 2 cups of tea before sitting with me again on the sofa. So, you're saying your daughter isn't yours? No. That happened a few years before that. I know Rachel is mine, I never doubted it, but the baby that was growing inside her wasn't. The chat logs show the girls were all torn over what to do. Half felt it was wrong to deny life. The other 2 felt that, if they didn't abort it, everyone's lives would crumble into a million pieces. Eventually, despite the fact that it would happen anyway, Chrissy made the decision. She had an abortion? I thought back to that time. I remember Chrissy being down for a while, depressed and wanting me to stay home. Now I understood why. It didn't excuse the betrayal, and it would have consequences. I was starting to go down that road now. We sat in silence for a while, sipping the hot tea. I could see Anika processing everything, figuring out what to say next, then she came right out with it. Before we go into the fallout, the consequences you've decided need to happen, am I right in thinking that your daughter is around the same age now as your wife was back then? I nodded my agreement. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Let's say she did get pregnant and she somehow messed up, just like your wife did. But my daughter wouldn't do that. She's too young to be faced with that level of dilemma in her life. And that's my point, Keith. Don't you see? Even though things are a little more liberal these days, imagine your daughter in a similar situation, the lives of others hanging on her decision, and hers alone. Keeping all the people who genuinely love her in the dark. Chrissy was damned. No matter what decision she made, there were always consequences or potential consequences if some things came to light. But think about her. What's her stance on abortion? I remember having a conversation when she was pregnant with Rachel. I guess most couples do. We talked about whether something would be wrong with the baby when it arrived, something that would significantly impact its life after it was born. She said that she would love that child just as much as a healthy one. The bringing of life into this world is the most precious thing. I couldn't finish the sentence. Although I felt betrayed, how had my wife managed to handle the decision she had made? A decision I suspected ran counter to her values but felt compelled to make, for the benefit of others. I realized she was sentenced to life. Not for the infidelity but for the taking of a life. That's how she would cope with it. It made sense she had tried to atone by being the wife that she had become. I felt tears again. I hadn't realized how emotionally devastating this would be. Then something came to me. Something that Paul had said. "Keith, are you okay? What's wrong? You're as white as a sheet." When I found out what had happened, I wanted to kill Chrissy. At least part of me was still reeling from that over the last few days. I don't get scared. I never touched her. But what I did do was drive over to Paul's and Penny's house. Then I smashed their car and beat the hell out of Paul. He just stood there smirking. He'd fall over and get back up. He just refused to defend himself. He said he's been punished brutally and partly because of my transgressions. Oh God, I get it now what he was saying. They don't have any children. We never asked why. I think he answered the question in that statement. They couldn't have kids. He lost what would have been his blood. This is getting worse by the minute. Keith, you've had a tough and traumatic couple of days. You need to get some sleep. Please, text someone you trust. Let them know you're safe. Then you can work out what to do next, tomorrow. I quickly opened my phone. As it got a signal, it started pinging like crazy with missed calls and a whole bunch of texts. Before I could send a message to the person I needed to, she called me. It was Rachel. "Dad, where are you? I've been calling you every 5 minutes. Everyone is sick with worry. Mom's been crying non-stop and blaming herself. She's saying things that are making me scared for you." "My angel, where are you?" "I'm at home. Mom called me in the States last night, and I got a train home this morning. I got here late afternoon. Mom's falling apart. You need to come home. I need to sort some things out first. Your mom and I have some issues." She cut me off. I could hear my daughter sobbing, her voice no longer fraught with angst. It was becoming more pitiful. "Stop, Dad. I know. I know what happened. I know everything. Mom told me over the phone last night. Oh, it's all so messed up. What are we going to do, Dad? Are you going to get a divorce? What's going to happen to me?" "Shush, it's going to be okay. No matter what happens, we both love you. We just need to get through this." After hugging me a little longer, Rachel could see that I and Chrissy needed to talk. She went back to her laptop and headphones, though I suspect she was just focusing on the ear. No music was playing. I made some tea and we sat at our spot, which was beginning to feel more like a boardroom than a dining room with a table. All we were missing was our legal representatives. I'm sure in time that could happen. As we sat facing each other, the same question came to me. Before I could even begin with my inquiries, Chrissy beat me to the punch. "Who was that woman, Keith? I don't recognize her or her car." I sat looking at her, my emotions now simply neutral, and I'm sure she could see that. As the seconds ticked by, the expression on her face began to change. Her eyes widened and her jaw slacked as she put her hand to her mouth. She sat like that. She wasn't sobbing or wailing, just a single tear rolled slowly down each cheek. "How long has this been going on, Keith? Are you leaving me for her?" I didn't answer. Nothing changed as I maintained that emotionless facade. Chrissy, her expression changing, her hands moving from her mouth. Instead of anguish, something else emerged. A rage, a betrayal. My lips curled into a slight smile. That's what it must feel like to be on the receiving end of an affair. Without warning, she stood, the chair tilting as she rushed upstairs, followed by the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut. So Rachel appeared and looked at me. I shook my head. She understood her mother needed some space. I paused the personal side of things to catch up on some business. While I was gone, my partners, excluding Paul who knew, realized something was up. I told them I had some personal matters to sort out with Chrissy. I would be back to business as soon as possible. So the beauty of 5, but now 4 in my mind, had helped sustain our business. The 4 of us, I had some tough decisions to make, and I needed to try and separate the business from the emotional choices I was going to make shortly. A few hours later, I received a text from Annika. I'm sorry if I've messed things up. I didn't intend for any of that to happen. Please accept my apology for my lack of discretion. If I'm being honest, I could easily be Joyce McKinney to you. I didn't understand the last part, but chuckled as I looked up the name. It turned out that Joyce had kidnapped, bound, and raped a man years ago. It had been a media sensation, quite a captivating story. I replied to her message. It's okay, in a strange way it might actually help. You definitely made an impact as Chrissy could see it in my eyes. I'm waiting for her to reappear so we can try to move forward. Moments later, Chrissy reappeared, and we sat at the table. I initiated the next round of conversations. It hurts, doesn't it? At least you know now and not 20 years from now. If you think it hurts now, you'll feel worse, not better finding out at some point down the line. Chrissy nodded. A weak smile was all she could muster. Keith, how long? Are you going to leave me for her? That's what began to bring me to tears. I told her about how we'd met, how she'd supported me, and what had transpired in Manchester. The only question I didn't want to and couldn't really answer was there something between us? I didn't even know. The next thorny topic was Paul and Penny. Chrissy had driven over there and arrived after I had left. In the morning, she had called our insurance company and said she had misjudged her turn and crashed into the garage door. The car was reclaimed by the repair company, and it was currently being fixed. They're not taking this any further. Paul said that it closed the biggest mistake of his life. He hoped you might find it in your heart to forgive him for what happened, but he understood it was entirely up to you. But Penny despises you. She said she'd kill you if you two ever met again. I slapped her hard, and Paul had to hold her back as she cursed me and you. She said I stole Paul's only child, that it haunted them both when they found out Penny couldn't have children. Damn, this is all so messed up. The tears began to really flow. This time I moved around the table and put my arm around her. She turned, resting her head on my hip. Yes, I had been thinking about what Annika had said. I was still feeling the rage inside, but Annika's words had lessened it considerably. We talked a little longer. This time we opened a bottle of red wine. I wanted to talk about moving forward. The others need to know at least most of the truth. I'm happy to keep the blackmail quiet. Unless it's raised by others, I'll stick to the original story that you all told me. I won't mention or share the pictures, just say I found some information that shed light on everything. I can't keep this quiet, Chrissy. It's not in my nature. The last piece of the puzzle is, I expect Paul to announce his retirement from the business. Either he's a silent partner, or we buy him out. If we need to, I'll find a way to buy his share and own his portion. There's no compromise here. That's what's going to happen. I'll set a meeting for Friday evening at our offices, and all the wives are invited. And it will give you a chance to tell them what's coming, and they can approach it in whatever way they feel is appropriate. Chrissy looked down at the table, nodding at each relevant part of my declaration. I could see her taking a deep breath. I could see her preparing to ask the million-dollar question, the one that kept spinning around in my mind like a tennis ball at Wimbledon on center court. She tried to raise her head to look at me, her voice barely a whisper as her lips trembled. What about us? Are we finished? Are you getting a divorce? I think we need some time apart. I love you. I always have, and I always will. Before I loved you with all my heart, but now I find there's resentment in there. Part of me hates you for what you did.
Can we fix it? Honestly, I don't know. I'm going to find a rental apartment for 6 months, somewhere close by. Let's see how we cope being apart. Maybe some space can start to mend our relationship, but there are no guarantees. In 6 months if we have to, then I'll start divorce proceedings.
I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of what might happen was too difficult to say. We needed to be realistic about where we were with our relationship. Chrissy didn't make a sound. Her body just convulsed as her tears quickly soaked my shirt. Her arms tightly wrapped around my waist. Sigh. So it was done. The road ahead was now clear. The next hurdle was Friday night. We figured out how to coexist for the next few days. I was talking to Annika every day. I had no doubt she would happily let things progress between us. We both knew that we needed to let the dust settle after what had transpired. If that was the path we both chose to take, we would remain friends, that much we were certain. Without her, I'm sure the enraged beast inside me, which had risen so unexpectedly, would have caused more devastation than what had already occurred. She took a day off work on Friday and met me for lunch. I had been working through what I was going to say. Since my conversation with Chrissy, I had called Paul, not to apologize, but to let him know what I expected from him, his complete or partial departure from our business. In return, I would not reveal that he was the catalyst that started it all, nor would I expose his blackmail that escalated everything to a head all those years ago. He had agreed and would be there on Friday for the right reason, that he was leaving our business. After lunch, she drove me to the office. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see all the cars there, including Chrissy's, who had just arrived. I suddenly felt a little guilt that Annika had dropped me off, even though I had promised Chrissy I would come home with her after the meeting. Annika wished me luck and said she would call her later to let her know how it went. She had booked a hotel in town, just in case things went south and I needed a place to crash. As I left her, Chrissy looked over at me. The hurt of seeing me leave Annika's car was etched on her face. As I walked towards the building, she suddenly started running towards me. I stopped because I thought she had gone mad at the sight of Annika with me. As I turned sideways to get into a defensive posture, I suddenly realized that a car was barreling towards me incredibly fast. Before I could react, Chrissy slammed into me. Despite her stature, she still had enough momentum to send me sprawling back a few feet. Those few feet were likely what saved my life.
Pain signals flooded my brain, the source of the pain coming from my knee, which had been struck by the car. As I began to fall, it felt like the world slowed down. The car hit Chrissy, who still carried some momentum from crashing into me. That momentum, as she leapt the final few yards, sent her flying up and over, not under the car. Her body tumbled through the air as her skull impacted the windshield before flipping over the roof to land on the ground, a sickening pile, with one leg twisted at an unnatural angle.
As I tried to get up, the pain stopping me from doing so, I frantically dragged myself across the ground towards her. The way she had hit her head on the tarmac, she was in a bad way, or she was dead. Before I reached her, Annika was down beside her. She was saying medical terms. I didn't understand what they meant. As I reached the women, Annika thrust her phone into my hand, telling me to hold it so I could relay messages. In a matter of seconds, she started CPR. Chrissy had stopped breathing. It was a massive blur. Some things, like the sight of Chrissy's head hitting the windshield, became crystal clear, replaying in my mind. The sound of the car hitting us, hitting a parked car, didn't even register. As people spilled out of the office, a voice suddenly grew louder in my mind. Bum. A cruel, angry voice, spewing death and venom. Penny. I promise you, next time you'll die at my feet, I promise you that. You should have been the first, then that bitch of a wife. She took my family and killed my husband. With Penny being restrained by Terry and Gavin, her husband Paul stood there, a broken man. He knew there was no coming back from this. As the ambulance arrived, because of the severity of her condition, Annika went with Chrissy. A second ambulance came for me. By then, the police had arrived. After a paramedic had tried to assess Penny to see if she was injured, they had decided to sedate her to calm her down. As I was being loaded into the ambulance, I saw the police cuffing her to a stretcher as they prepared to load her into a third ambulance. My knee was broken. The only thing they could do was a complete replacement done as an emergency procedure that night. When I woke up, and after I'd lost my sticky feeling following the general anesthetic, there were two women sat around my bed, each holding one of my hands. Rachel and Annika. Rachel was crying. Annika looked like she always had. I uttered one word. Chrissy. Annika answered. In intensive care, they fought to save her, and they think she might be stabilizing. She has a fractured skull, broken legs, a broken arm, and brain bleeding. I looked up at the ceiling. Why? Why, sir? Easy, you need to rest. I'm going to get an update on her. I'll leave you and Rachel for a bit. So with that, Annika excused herself. Rachel leaned towards me, trying to hug me as best as she could as she cried. It made me think, maybe John had returned right there at that base. There would be no good in rummaging around those ghosts on the walls. Should I take his advice, burn it all down, and do what the girls and Paul had done? Try to live as silently as possible with the guilty knowledge? 18 months later, I contemplated what had happened. The police concluded that Chrissy's act of selflessness saved my life. Their opinion was that I would likely have fallen, not got up, if the car had struck me directly. Their calculations showed that my upper body and head would have been crushed as Penny hit the parked cars. I would have been dead, and Penny would have been charged with murder, not GBH. From the ashes of our marriage, a phoenix had risen. It was almost a final act by Chrissy to prove she loved me. So loved me more than her own life, which she seemed ready to sacrifice. It was a humbling experience for me. I knew that she had made some terrible decisions in her early adulthood. One decision based on a deceitful lie, and another because she was prepared to sacrifice herself to save others, and that included me. Oh, me. I thought back to the earlier conversation between Annika and me, as she argued that ultimately, Chrissy was caught between a rock and a hard place. She was right. No matter what Chrissy chose, it was a lose-lose-low situation. Chrissy had done everything to be the perfect wife. She had tried her hardest to prove that she put her family and her husband first. Sure, the vows of marriage actually stipulated that not so many words. But I knew, deep down, that what had transpired all those years ago had ensured that Chrissy gave 110%, not just 100%, to our marriage. As I prepared to walk away, Penny became the catalyst to give us a second chance. Chrissy recovered but is partially disfigured from the injuries. Her speech is affected. Initially she had a stammer, but speech therapy had mitigated that so it was barely noticeable. She also walks with a limp, now needing a walking stick. There was one other positive that arose from it all. She has no memory of the time before Penny hit her. Even though a lot was brought up in court and there were tears, the pain was lessened to some extent. Maybe because for me now it was history. The conversations with Annika, as she tried to make me look at the issues from different perspectives, had helped, but they had never completely mitigated the pain. I would have to learn to cope with it, despite the odd dark day, often triggered by something or someone. Penny received a 10-year sentence for GBH, although she's serving her sentence in the psychiatric wing of a prison. And my friends and business partners. Well, it was messy. Knowing what was coming on that fateful Friday night, Anne and Felicity chose to tell Terry and Gavin what had transpired earlier. Like me, they were devastated, the difference being they hadn't seen the images, which I had either deleted or destroyed, depending on the format. Vicky and Steve were not so fortunate. She had a gut feeling that trying to broach this with him before would be a disaster, so she decided to wait until the meeting to let him know. She hoped seeing how Terry and Gavin reacted would guide him. After the chaos that ensued following Penny's attempt to take me out, the others discussed the past. By all accounts, there was a lot of shouting and accusations flying around. Before things settled down over the following weeks, except for Steve and Vicky, he couldn't see a way back, even though it was in the past. The story made the papers. For them, it was a front-page sensation with all the ingredients for the hungry public, who lapped it up. I even watched a discussion on a late-night talk show where two academics battled it out over what should be done: ignore what happened or confront it. It seemed to have divided the country in terms of what action people would take. Throughout the whole thing, we as individuals tried to stay out of the limelight. It had attracted interest from a multinational company, sniffing around for a chance to acquire a successful national business at a bargain price. The business was sold with Terry and Gavin staying on to take it forward. The rest of us took our money. We had taken a financial hit, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I went through a period of depression. It was Annika and her boyfriend, who was about to become my husband, that pulled me back from that dark abyss. Following the trial, and with the story being dragged through the tabloids, Paul took his own life. He was vilified by the press, and to varying degrees by those who had once been his closest friends. Added to that, his wife was incarcerated and ostracized. He made that final, sad choice to end his life. I felt responsible. At that point, I wished I had burned those photos right then and there. Everything would have stayed the same. Even if it meant that everyone had to live with the discomfort for the rest of their lives, that would have included me. I mentioned Annika. When she arrived at the hospital with Chrissy, things were precarious. The doctor who helped Annika keep Chrissy alive before she went into surgery was a guy called Colin. From that Friday, two unexpected events had sprouted and had now taken firm root. Colin's wife had died in the initial COVID outbreak. She was also a doctor, one of many healthcare workers across the world who sacrificed themselves in the fight to save others. As their love blossomed, so did another. Colin had a son, Callum, the same age as Rachel. Rachel and Callum hit it off immediately. Right now, they're somewhere in Australia with a little bit of money from us. They're living the good life. It's great for them. We are firm, and in reality, now they are our closest friends, Annika and Colin. Annika eventually moved to work at our local hospital, along with moving in with Colin. That left one more million-dollar question to be answered. Because Chrissy had no current memory of the events, she didn't remember that she had known that I had slept with Annika. As this blended relationship developed, Colin realized first how Annika was involved in Maya and Chrissy's lives. When we felt the time was right, we all sat down and broke the news to Chrissy as gently as possible. She cried, feeling hurt, but she had enough information from what had happened to understand why it had taken place.
With that, we blew any chance of another ghost lurking around, potentially reappearing after another 20 years. No one deserved to go through that experience again.
Did you enjoy the ride? I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's a wrap. Peace out.